One Room is an anime about someone living in Tokyo who has run-ins with three girls and forms bonds with them. It's told entirely in first person, with no dialogue from the main character, or I guess from you, that's actually heard. The girls just respond to lines you'd hypothetically have said, but that aren't actually in the show. It takes place over the course of 3 arcs, each of which consists of 4 3-minute-long episodes, for a total runtime of less than an hour. It was a web original and, not as I expected, a visual novel adaptation. Let's start with a disclaimer here. I don't want to preach to you guys, and I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it's this catastrophic thing for a story to have a negative view on women. Not everything's about social justice, and a story doesn't become worse because I disagree on how it portrays women. I'm about to talk about a sexist show, and I'm going to talk about the sexism, but I don't see it as my job to make you think critically about gender and storytelling. My job is to help you avoid making the same writing mistakes as the worst anime out there. And while One Room is sexist, it's also really fucking bad. The first arc kicks off with a girl at the tail end of high school moving next door to you. She gives you a gift. Later you find her on the street and help her carry her groceries home, after which she asks you to help her study because you're in college and she's taking her final exams to get into college. That's the plot summary. But during all of that, we get a ton of very literal male gaze. The way this is shot is just so incredibly horny. The main character is constantly checking this girl out, and when it isn't from his point of view, it's still checking out her chest, or ass, or thighs, not to mention how much work they did to draw enough details on the folds of her uniform that you could imagine her body under it. They were really trying to sell the sex appeal, to the point where this show is physically strenuous to watch because it's just that uncomfortable. But a key moment is near the beginning where you stare at her chest and she thinks you're looking at her uniform, and at no point does she notice and object to this leering throughout the entire arc. In episode 2, you help her study, well, you guessed it, leering, and then afterwards the water breaks after which the water stops working, so you two go to the bathhouse together since you can't take baths at home. This is when she drops a line about how she was feeling nervous about moving somewhere new, but you made her feel more comfortable and at home, and this is where I had to stop and ask some questions. If taken at face value, this means one of 3 things. 1. Her relationship with her peers and adult mentors at school are cold and isolating, a topic which is probably far more interesting and pressing than a fucking bathhouse episode. 2. You played a small role and she's really just trying to be polite because she's a nice person like that and she actually has a lot of support from everyone else in her life. Or 3, what the answer probably is, which is that every part of her life which doesn't have to do with you is hand-waved and not thought about because she's not meant to be a 3-dimensional autonomous person as multifaceted as you are, who you're merely getting glimpses into the life of. She's an object the audience is able to project their loneliness onto because she represents their ideal of a perfect woman, which cannot possibly exist in real life because what we're supposed to interpret her as does not mesh with a girl who has a life outside of her collision course with the inside of your fucking kitchen. This is not a character moment. This is not a character. She lacks the qualities to be considered a character in my eyes. This is an almost character. See, a character is more than just a symbolic representation of a person. Crucial to the concept of a character are character traits. These traits aren't just what informs how a character acts. They inform how a character responds to their environment. They receive information, process it, and then output behavior. But that's not what's happening here. She reacts to something without regard for how she'd see the world, and instead with regard to what's convenient to you. Episode 3 has her thanking you for tutoring her by, you guessed it, cooking for you. And over all 3 of these episodes, she's constantly apologizing and acting nervous. See, she's constantly nervous and worried about what we think of her because that gives us the power. This isn't a realistic depiction of social anxiety, it's a fabricated version of it designed to be appealing to us. Because all we need to do is accept the pretty girl, and then the pretty girl feels indebted to us. Her social anxiety only exists as far as it allows that dynamic, and then it ceases to be. Like I said, she's almost a character. Despite all of the time you two spent studying, she doesn't get into her preferred school, and credit to the show, she's showing a pretty realistic cocktail of emotions here, and I really appreciated that. It was a nice moment. You then suggest something to her which gives her hope, and then cue episode 4. She stays overnight to start studying for a retake, and it couldn't be more obvious she's going to pass. And then she passes. Afterwards, she takes you out on a walk where there are a bunch of cherry blossoms and explains to you that she wanted to go to that university because it's where her parents met, and so she thinks that if she goes to that university, she'll meet the love of her life too, which is a clever way to cap off a romance with this general premise, because it's like, oh, because she worked so hard to get into that university, she met you and you're the love of her life, and it happened in a way that she didn't expect, which is really cool. In any other romance story, this would be really, really cool. The problem is a matter of no setup for what could have been a decent payoff. See, her whole story is about her bond with you, but you are poorly defined, and therefore her story is amorphous, loose, and lacking in definition. That makes it so there's no punch to this moment. There's no underlying meaning to it because there's no deep connection between you two. There can't be a deep connection. The concept of a girl getting to know her tutor as she strives for a certain school is a decent idea for a love story. However, that'd only work if the tutoring was used as a way for a relationship to form, and then for the fact you helped her achieve her goals to be used as something to strengthen it. In One Room, the fact that you helped her achieve her goals is the relationship. It's romantic affection exchanged for favors in a reaction. It's what a lot of lonely guys wish dating worked like. This is wish fulfillment boiled down to its bare essentials, like a sandwich made out of a grain of rice stuck between two pieces of Wonder Bread. This is such an ineffective way of getting emotions out of an audience. It's fine to write a romance we can project ourselves onto, and it's one thing to write one that teaches you unfortunate things about romance, but it's another for it to also just have no emotional impact because you forgot that all of the things you remember from cheesy love stories require setup for them to work. That's what One Room is. Creepy, wish fulfillment romance with everything removed except for the cliches, horniness, and sense of self-importance. On to the next girl. The next girl is your little sister. Like, your actual little sister who's visiting from home. And she calls you Oni-chan. And looks like this. Also, what is with this, assertive, near flirty way that she's talking to you? Does anyone know any little sisters who act like that? Waifu bait. More like end my lifeu bait. She wishes the AC was on, but you're trying to save money. Then she catches you leering, and they just move on. There was this moment earlier on in the first plot arc where the girl finds out, oh, you've got some porn lying around, but she's kind of cool about it and doesn't really judge you for it, which was almost kind of like a nice moment, but this kind of stuff really ruins it. It's clear that the author is painting a world where girls don't feel uncomfortable at the thought of being sexualized. The first girl said, "You're a boy after all," after finding his porn, and I guess that's why this guy is staring at a young teenager's thighs as she airs out her dress. This is what I mean about these girls being impossible. Their actions are designed based on what is convenient for the audience. Now, there are some things we can all agree on. Like, if you fantasize about forming a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old while you're in college, you should get help immediately. But then Japan shows up and messes with my head, because there's no way that this many people are actual pedophiles or hebophiles. It can't be that everyone responsible for creating and consuming content like this has a genuine mental disorder. It's too prevalent and it's too normalized. So how did we get here? Well, I'm no expert on the subject, thankfully, but when I watch this, I try to ask myself, how is the audience intended to interpret this, and what parts are they supposed to enjoy? For the 17-year-old girl trying to get into college, it was self-explanatory. The way things started were very rooted in reality. Everything she does that was unrealistic was in response to what the main character does, so it's just the show glorifying the man's actions and simplifying the woman's psyche. But then we get to this bitch. She is actively interested in the main character despite her age. A relationship of this kind is okay not according to the main character, but according to this young girl. And moreover, she hides her feelings. This arc is about how she shows her feelings despite not putting them into words. One of these girls gives you unrealistic expectations of how people will react to your actions. This is giving you an unrealistic expectation of what a young girl's behavior means in regards to whether or not they want your cock.
Save me, Chainsaw Man.
I don't have it in me to go into detail on all of the shit she says and does. It's just disgusting. The story's arc is that you're always working so hard at your job that you're always tired. She tries to do a lot for you to cheer you up, and then in the end, you show her you appreciate her efforts. Once again, a completely bare-bones plot skeleton with no setup to the payoffs. Or, well, there was a tiny bit because they talked about you being tired and she was acting like your fucking maid for the whole thing. We never really get insight into her character. She says she misses you, and oh, she's sad to see you sad, but it's so uncomplicated and shown in such a bland, obvious way. You need detail and nuance and originality. This thing reads like a plot summary to an actual story. And don't bring up the 3-minute time window. Lots of people can make compelling arcs in that amount of time. That's how long most songs are, and plenty of them change as they go and misdirect the audience in clever ways. In the end, she leaves to go live with your parents again. And she directly implies she likes you romantically. And then you flirt with her instead of the other way around for a change. Character development? Now, what I do appreciate is that there's a good moral that's intended here. These anime girls represent the creators telling you that you are valuable for the work you put in at your dead-end job, which is wholesome. But that justifies none of this. Alright, bring on the big boobs. Let's get some brain bleach. The third arc starts off with you and your childhood friend. You're trying to become a writer, and she's trying to become a singer-songwriter. You take her to the park so that she can practice without causing noise complaints, like, wow, this would almost be a really relatable and interesting character detail if it didn't follow up immediately with her being a little happy at the main character treating her like a girl, so I guess we're just not giving a fuck this time. She takes you to her room afterwards, so I guess that title was a lie. You two talk, and it turns out that you moved away after you guys graduated high school. It's weird how they're making this increasingly specific backstory for you two. I figured this was being intentionally vague so anyone can imagine it happening to them, but I guess this is more similar to a normal story, which is nice. Then the two of you agree to support each other with your passions, and then it goes to the next episode. This actually made me feel a bit of something, like emotionally. Alright, I'm gonna be honest. This show making me feel something was a bit of whiplash, and it made me hesitate to keep watching. A little while later, I finished it, watching the rest of this girl's part. It was an interesting experience. A refreshing one, a confusing one, and a mildly concerning one. Now, the first thing to note is that the subject matter of this mini arc is very close to me personally. There's a bit of me both in the girl and in the loose personality they gave the main character. The overall story is that the two of you are artists who are trying to make their way in the world. The two of you spend a lot of time together and you support her through all of this. And at one point, she has one too many false starts and decides to give up. But then you show her the novel you've been working on, which has lines in it inspired by her and that seem designed to cheer her up, and she asks you to wait for her, since she's going to get there too. And this scene actually made me tear up for a second. I didn't give up. I was just resting a bit. That line got to me. And that's when I remembered that this was a web original, and probably someone's passion project. This is something that resonates with me very deeply, and you can tell it's the same for the person who made this. Another thing that I think got to me is that for brief periods, it portrayed something kind of like the love story I'd want to be in. Two people with their own dreams living side by side, playing games, chatting, confiding in each other, and making each other's day a bit brighter. I fantasized about that. I got really into it because I saw myself in this girl, and I saw what I wanted in this girl. And it sort of made me think, maybe this show does have some value. I look at the previous two arcs, and there were these themes. The first one was a story of a girl who has something she's striving for, and has to deal with the emotions of only achieving it through someone else's guidance, starting with shame and guilt and ending in gratitude. And it's the story of someone who finds meaning in watching someone else grow in order to achieve their dreams. The second is about someone who works themselves ragged, and of someone who sees them do this and feels guilty over not being able to help someone who's going through so much more than they are, but still interacting with them on a regular basis, which is also a pretty complicated set of feelings. The first two stories missed the mark hard, but maybe that's not because of poor intentions, and instead because of a failure of execution. The third story wasn't anything too in-depth, but it did a good job of getting to a set of emotions and conveying ideas involved in very realistic, real-life struggles. And the main character always goes to great lengths for these girls, so maybe this could be read as a really well-intentioned story with a positive message. But then I think about the execution. Even in the last arc, things felt off to me. So much was framed in terms of what you are doing for her, and very rarely, if ever, the other way around. And the show just becomes this walking contradiction. It's a show about helping other people, but it's also about the romantic reward you get from it. It's a show about the complex emotions of gratitude, but those emotions are framed in terms of how they can be fetishized by the person they are directed at. These girls are framed as these objects of desire, and their gratitude is used as a way for the people that you want to feel honored you'd even want them around at all, implying that they have a natural pull towards you that you simply have to accept and allow. And I know that was just a really cynical description of how a relationship works on a technical level, but no, actually it's not. It's an almost relationship. Like, we had almost character traits and almost character arcs. This is something similar but not the same. It's missing something crucial: self-sacrifice. I try to do things for the people close to me, and you know what it doesn't feel like? Heroic. It can be bothersome, stressful, even painful sometimes. That's what makes it self-sacrifice. But when it's for someone you care about, it feels no different than going through a struggle for your own sake. That's why people do it, because self-sacrifice for those we love is a natural part of being human. But it isn't framed that way here. See, rather than framing self-sacrifice in terms of what you are willing to do for someone else, it's framed in terms of how grateful that other person should be for it. I did X, Y, and Z, which makes me total boyfriend material. But in this show, it's never touched on what that was like for you. It never explores what self-sacrifice means to you, only what it means to her. And then it goes on about how they treat you as a result. That's what the focus is on. This isn't exploring the idea of helping someone, it's fetishizing it. If you want to help someone like the main character helps these girls, that's going to mean helping them when doing so isn't convenient for you. It's going to mean having to suppress emotions of frustration or even exasperation at times. It takes kindness, compassion, patience, and humility. It's difficult and requires strength of character to pull through with. Those are the things that make the girl fall for the guy in these love stories. And if you try to stay up all night helping some kid cram for a math test on the regular, and you're not as generous as you like to tell yourself you are, that's gonna come out, and the girl might not want to get into your pants after that. Will things go bad? If they go bad, will things smooth out? Are you really willing to do all of this work for nothing in return? That depends on a lot of things. On what the person means to you, on what you can bear to part with, and on what strengths you have. All of those things hinge on who you are and where you are in life. But in one room, you aren't anyone. You are an amorphous blob anyone can project themselves onto. The ability to stick with some girl through thick and thin, even when you have your own problems, is taken for granted. This kind of thing is considered romantic because of how meaningful it is to do, but they skip past that part entirely and go to the aftermath. And so this isn't a love story. It's incomplete. And that's why One Room rings hollow to me. It's a story about girls, but only the parts of them you want to be involved with. It's a story about relationships, but only the parts that are convenient for you. It's a story about your actions, but only in terms of how cool you are for them. It's an almost story with almost characters, almost themes, and almost messages. If this show is what gets you through the day, then I'm glad it exists, but it'll never hold any true meaning. Not in my opinion, at least. Even if it touches on important things, it will always fail to grasp them, because you can't grab something with almost a hand. Also, the lowly shit makes me want to puke. The piece of writing advice to get from all of this is how important empathy is. You need to have empathy for your characters. You need to think about what they would be feeling, what they'd do, and what they'd want. It's so easy to make their decisions based on the narrative, but writing them that way hurts their quality. It makes them less engaging. It's your job as a writer to make the narrative you want happen organically as a result of who your characters are established as from the beginning. That's not easy. Writing isn't easy, but you need to do your best at it. You can't just make your characters these symbols for the message you want to tell. Everything will ring hollow. No matter what your message is, no one will care unless you couch it within a story that engages them for reasons unrelated to the message, and those reasons are likely going to be compelling characters who seem like real people. Well, that was a ride. I hope it has a second season. And a spin-off. Oh!